as we're starting this, we have a lot to cover today. And Manu decided, 3 chapters. So I think, Sarah, if you can help us through this. We will be rushing through this. There are a couple of themes that I definitely wanted to still spend time on. So as we're going through the study of these 3 chapters, and it's just a beautiful summary of all the things that we've actually been talking about in our study of 2 Samuel. And it just talks about David's testimony, right? And the last 3 chapters just go very well together in that it is a summary of his life and how he is, it's an expression of his thanksgiving to God, right? So as we go into the 2 Samuel chapter 22, right? It is more or less a copy of Psalm 18. You'll see that very little changes has happened. I think, this most of it has been changed a little bit here and there in keeping with Israel's worship theme. And it was something that has been taken care of towards in between, but it is very minor changes. And if you see this entire verse 22, I've tried to break it down into chunks that were a little bit more digestible. So these are the kind of ways. I had sent a different chunk before in the questions. I have changed it here. And if we just look at this, and you can just open our Bibles to this because there is quite a bit there. And the words are just, the way in which David uses these words, it is just beautiful, right? In the pictures that he's able to paint with the usage of these words. It was something that we believe was written, during his younger years. And we'll see especially one part which makes us question, like, okay, why have they put it here in this verse if it was done during his younger years? But I think it has been inserted here because it is a powerful testimony nevertheless, right? And we do see how all of it, and we can see how these verses just beautifully explain David's relationship with God, right? It just talks about the fact how he always has, seen God as a sovereign Lord who knows, who has the power to deliver, and just the necessity and obedience from each one of us to just follow the law, right? Those are the key themes from the Psalm 22, Samuel 22, 2 Samuel was chapter 22. So over here in the first 4 verses, right? If you see some of the words that David uses, right? He uses words like my rock, my fortress, my strength, my shield, my stronghold, my refuge, my savior, right? When you're using words like mine and the authority with which he uses these kind of words, it feels like he's using it. He's just not just saying words just to fill the blanks, right? It feels like he knows every word and the intention, the meaning behind it. And he is very, very clear about the fact that, that relationship that he shares, and he can, and if you would, stop him and question him as a rock, why did you say that, right? Fortress, why did you say that? My deliverer, everything he has these examples. And we know, even through our study, we know the kind of challenges he's faced, right? But what struck me from these verses was just the way in which he's like stamping authority, right? It's mine. And it's he has no doubt about it. It's mine, God is mine. And that kind of ownership and that kind of assurance is something that I don't know if all of us demonstrate in every time, in every phase of our life. And I thought that was what spoke to me from those verses, right? Now, if you look at verses 5 to 7, right? The usage of words like waves of death floods of ungodliness, sorrows of Saul, right? It's just snares of death. It's all very, very, like the picture is very, very grim. And when you're talking about it in terms of, oh yeah, when you remember the kind of things he went through, right? I was just thinking about that time that he escaped Saul, and what was the king of Gath, if you remember, right? He is escaping Saul, and he's going to the king of Gath, and he has to feign insanity, right? And so many more instances, right? The situations and the circumstances around him were really scary, depressing. If you think about the fact that, I mean, when you're in a flood, your waves of death, if that's the way in which he is describing it, you can see that he's just getting overwhelmed by the circumstances, and you can understand that. And then in verse, and through it all, he's saying that God is, he feels that in that distress also I called on the Lord, right? And I cried out to my God, and my voice was heard, right? I think every time, even in that overwhelming thing of, when you feel overwhelmed, just to be able to see that, okay, God is present in, through that storm of life, he is in the boat with me, right? I think that's an important aspect that we are called to demonstrate from this, right? And then if you go on to verse 8 to 16, and I'll give everybody a chance to also just to share what you guys got, right, as the important words. So I would love to hear what words and what verses stood out for each of you also, right? From 8 to 16, when you hear the earth shook, smoke went through his nostrils, fire devouring from his mouth, darkness underneath his feet. It's like, even though God, knew that, okay, Saul was, even though God knew that it's going to be a difficult time, but David has been anointed, it wasn't that we're getting the message that comes across from that is he wasn't happy. He was not relaxing and sitting back and saying, okay, that's happening, I'll take care of it. I mean, that's not the way. It's like he is present. He is there. He is riding on those clouds. He's coming to save. He's like, it's not somebody who's sitting back. It's like somebody who's active, somebody who's alive, somebody who's pained, who is angered, and that emotions that are talked about, it just makes us feel like, oh, wow, my God has emotions. He's not, I'll handle it, relax. He's not like that. I'm angry too. And that is, strengthening to me. It's powerful because, I want him to be angered for me. I want him to feel the frustration that I'm going through, right? So that I felt was, something that for me that stood out. And just the other aspect, I think, is was 17 to 20, right? Where we're talking about just the way he comforted me. He was my support. He brought me to the broad place. And it talks about the numerous times that he's experienced deliverance at the hand of God, right? Escaping, I remember one of those instances about the caves of Adullam, where his family comes, where 400 people come there to meet him, and they're all sad and distressed. That's the description of the people that come to him, right? Just that even in that moment of, he can see that God is there. It isn't the people that he was seeing. It is just the fact that God is the one who sent them to David, right? In every aspect, it isn't about, even in those things, he's seeing how God has been supreme, right? And how he has been there to rescue him throughout, right? Those are the things that stood out from that, those couple of verses from chapter 22, 21 to 28, right? In that thing, when we're talking about, 21 to 28, when we are talking about be merciful. One of the things that it says is, be merciful as God, be merciful and blameless, right? God rewarded me with my righteousness. When you hear this, you're feeling like, okay, really, David, you righteous, and that's something that you would question yourself. And he says that, oh, this could not have been written, after the time. But I think, when Nathan says in 2 Samuel 12:13 that the Lord has put away your sin, David claims that for himself, right? And he claims that the reassurance that, God is enough for me. Even though I might have sinned, God has made me righteous, right? I think that was something that you would question, especially in your thinking about his sin again, with Bathsheba and all that, right? But I think that he also, took it to heart that Nathan said that the Lord has put away your sin. And I think, therefore, it still deserves a place here, right? That's why this chapter deserves to be at the end, because it talks about the fact that no matter how much mistakes we make in our lives, the Lord will put us, just because of his grace, God separates us from our sin, right? And when we're talking about verses 26 to 28, where we said, with mercy, you will show yourself mercy. With the blameless man, you will show yourself blameless. Verse 26, yeah. I think it goes back to the Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, when he is talking about the fact that the same measure you use will be measured to you, right? And it's just talking about the need for suspending our judgment, and and what God is requiring of us in terms of the righteousness he displays to us. We are called to demonstrate that righteousness to others, right? And in verse 29 to 46, when we are talking about God as there are a couple of words that stood out, right? When he says, my lamp, he is the lamp which enlightens my darkness. And when he talks about, he's the one who teaches my hand to make war, right? I felt both of them were in connection with, okay, so thinking about it, how did David, a shepherd boy, know how to, direct people, how to take command of an army, and how to actually lead so many war conquests, right? And when you think about it, he says that none of it is mine. It is the Lord who was, dispelling my darkness. He was the one who was teaching me what it means to, wage war. And so I looked at it as this, he's seeing himself as a source of knowledge, and God is the one who provides strength and power, right? When he uses words like feet like a deer, right? When he's using like armed me with strength, when he's using words like I run and leap, right? So obviously there was physical capabilities that David had in waging so many wars, in so many of his role as conquest, as a conqueror, right? As a warrior. All of that, every little thing. There is no area in his life that he claims is, okay, I did it on my own. I was the one who was training. I was eating right. I was doing things. That's generally the way in which we would say, right? Okay, so what is the source of your strength, or what is the source of your thing? We would always start with, okay, I, have a healthy diet. This is the diet I followed. This is the kind of this thing that I did. This was the discipline that I had. Everything he talks about it as it's from God, right? So and then he goes back to that in verse 47 to 51. He says, he's the one who avenges me. He's the one who subdues people under me, right? And the fact that he is the head of the nations, right? He says, I beat them like fine dust. And it feels like, okay, now is he boasting? And foreigners submit to me, right? And in that also, when you're saying, like, when somebody else, when you hear someone else talk about, oh, I beat him to find dust, he said, because they looked and there was none to save, right? It wasn't because of my this thing, but they looked for others, but there was none to save them, right? In verse 42. In verse 45, it says, foreigners submit to me, right? And you think, oh, he's getting prideful. Look at him. He's talking about foreigners becoming, submitting to him. And he's saying, no, because you kept me as the head of the nations. Again, everything. There is not one aspect that he says, brilliant I was, how amazing I was, and just 47 and 51, which talks about the fact that it is by mercy of God and not by David's righteousness at all. So he keeps on saying that he comes back to that, and that's the basic foundation for of his relationship, right? So yes, this is where the first question, like I said, okay, I'm just monitoring the time. I'm hoping we're on time. So I would love to hear from you, which are the verses that encouraged you to worship and why. And just when are we called to praise? If you look at those references, that might also help. There are only few of us here. We can just go ahead and unmute and speak, or if you're more comfortable chatting, that's also fine.
One thing, Sarah, is verses 21 to 28. What does it really? I was just reading that. The Lord dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He rewarded me. Yeah, we know that David
was not clean.
Was not that, but then I think it is heart attitude that matters. Or thinking aloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, Vineet, when we think about all the things that he did, right, with not even, I mean, we think that somehow Bathsheba and the thing, that was also the sin, right? In terms of just righteousness, in terms of the way in which he reacted to his daughter's thing, in so many ways, right? It wasn't that he was righteous and he was clean and he was this thing, right? But yeah, where was his heart in through it all? And when the way in which we've seen so many of his failings, we don't think that he is right, but I don't think anybody in the Bible is right, save from Jesus, right? There is no other perfect example for us to follow other than Jesus. But we understand that he is somebody who believed in the fact that our sin is separated from us, right? And I think, I think I bring that out, another part of it also, because the more every time, I think this is something that I read, right? Every time that we are confessing and sin again and again, that same sin again and again, because we feel like, I don't know if, the first time I confessed it, if it was really, if it worked, I don't know, because but the point is, God is the cleanser of all of it, right? And it's not something like a soap, the kind of soap that you use that, okay, there is a little bit of a stain still left and I have to keep on using it multiple times for that stain to leave me. When you're confessing it to God, you are separated from that sin, and you are made righteous. And you don't need to crucify Jesus again and again on the cross just because you feel that, oh, I don't know if I was sorry enough. I don't know if I meant it enough. So it's like you're putting Jesus on the cross again and again and again for that same sin because you don't know if you've done it. I think that's what spoke to me, in that his heart was right. He knew it. Nathan told me, I confessed it. Nathan told me it's separated. I'm good. I think that's the assurance that we need to demonstrate in terms of righteousness and the cleansing that he talks about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's
all right. Okay, so we'll get on to the second part of it, which is the second chapter, which is 2 Samuel 23. And it's beautiful. We know this of David, that we are impressed. And when he opens up and he is like sharing his testimony, the way in which he introduces himself, right, is, what is the word he's saying? David, thus says David, the son of Jesse. And who was Jesse? Jesse was absolutely nobody. He was a farmer. There was no, great, some capabilities that Jesse has demonstrated, or some great virtues that Jesse had, or some conquests that he had made. He was a farmer. And if we remember that time that, when David was anointed, Jesse didn't even think it worthy that David should be brought before Samuel for the anointing, because he was like, no, all my children are here only. Is there nobody else? He had to ask him again. And that's when Jesse even thought of bringing David in front of Samuel. So in the sense of, okay, number one is he's so humble that he's claiming to be, that's where he was. That was this thing, lineage was of a farmer's son. Number two, the fact that also that there was no resentment. My dad didn't even think of me as important, like generally when we look at problems in our life, and I was treated like this as a child. These are all the things that went on in my life. And that's not the way he would, there is no resentment. He is proud of the fact that he was the son of a farmer. Yeah, I might have been overlooked by so many, but there was somebody who didn't overlook me, and I'm a man raised on high, right? When it mattered and who it mattered with, which is with God, right? He was raised on high, and he is the sweet psalmist of Israel, is what he is the way in which he's describing himself, right? Just the fact that when you think of you don't know if sweet is a word that you would use to describe David when you imagine him cutting off Goliath's head, when you imagine him, doing the planning of Uriah's murder and all that. But the point is that he was a man who had the power of his words, did have the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me, is the verse in Psalm 139:4, right? And there's nothing the tongue does not frame a word without you, is what Psalm 139:4 says, right? So in so many ways, through his verses, through his Psalms, in so many ways, he had shown that he's actually somebody who's even a prophet who spoke of the Messiah to come, and the kind of troubles that the Messiah would have to undertake. All of that is mentioned again in the Psalm, right? So yes, it was words that were coming from God, right? And he acknowledges that. So those kind of empowering and that enablement that he is seeing, it's coming from God, right? And when we talk about David's trust in God's covenant, which is verses 5-7, he knows that an everlasting covenant has been made. Faith that God will call, that, he had that faith that, I am, whatever I do, my house, there is a covenant that God has made with my house that will not, be broken, because he knew that once God has made a promise, that's it, right? And he can see that his house is falling short in so many ways. And we've just been through so many, the sword will not depart from your household, was what Nathan said. And we've been through the kind of ways that, war has tormented his household, David's household, right? In terms of his relationship with his son itself, Absalom. And he's just overcome that period. and he's seeing that, okay, my house has fallen short, and but still, and the fact that this sons of rebellion that he talks about, right, are shall be as thorns thrust away. So he knows that he has been covered. This is something that God has planned for him, and because of that, that's what makes him the greatest king, right? If you think about it, in terms of kings, his son Solomon follows him shortly, and if you think about the reign of these two kings, David and Solomon, right? You know that David's reign was mostly, he's been mostly at war. There has really been, whereas Solomon's reign, it is described as a time of peace, right? In terms of area that he reigns over, David doesn't have too much of property area as much as Solomon seems to have in his reign, right? And so, in terms of success, you would think that, okay, David wasn't really as successful as Solomon, right? But but when we go back to it, right, when we really look at it, David was somebody whose greatest desire was that I want to be in the household of God, right? Whereas when what is Solomon's greatest desire? He was a king, much early before his age. And so his greatest desire was wisdom. And when you think about it, wisdom is actually not too bad. I mean, that's nice that he sought wisdom because he was young. He didn't know if he would be able to, rule the people of Israel. It does absolutely make sense, right? In terms of his, where does that come from? But when you look at it, weigh it against each other, which is better, the desire to be in the household of God, or to have wisdom? Because eventually wisdom also, did not help Solomon, who towards the end of his life was clinging on to his wives, and those wives took him away from God, is what they said, right? So the wisdom also was inconsequential, right? So if you think about it like that, and also if you see, Jesus is said to be an ancestor of David, right? The son of David is referred to in Matthew 1:1, I think, where it says that the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David. It doesn't say son of Solomon, right? So what more, justification do we need to say that, okay, David was the one who was actually much more of a success as a king than Solomon, right? Because he was recognized, and in so many other places also, right? When the people are calling out the son of David, Jesus, son of David, it's again and again, it is David who is being called, who is being referred to with Jesus, right? So I think that itself speaks a lot about just his David's trust in the covenant, and just that that he was really somebody who honored God in all those ways, and it showed in the way in which people were referring to him, right? And we go on to the next part of of 2 Samuel 23, which in which it seems like it's a list, right? It's a list of all the people that you see over here. I mean, there are so many more mentioned. I've just taken 5 because it talks of all these people and their role in enabling David to be successful warrior, right? And that's something that stood out, because when you're thinking about Saul, and when you're thinking about the time that, when they came back as warriors, conquering warriors, when those girls were singing in the street, they were coming in a parade, and then Saul killed his thousands, David 10,000s. You really don't see any mention of who are those people. Saul was so uncomfortable with that, right? The fact that there were other people mentioned in the same breath with him, and the fact that there are other people also attributed as successful, was something that he was not comfortable with, right? And but here, what we are seeing is, in naming these men, there is this beautiful purpose, right? And that's the question that I'll come to later. But when you look at these instances of Adino the Eznite, Eliezer the son of Dodo, and Shammah the son of Egi, right? These are the three. So these are called, those are the inner three that David had. So they were called as the three, right? And nobody could even come near to what they had done, right? So if you look at Adino, right? Adino is the first one. So it talks about the fact that I think here it says 800, but in First Chronicles, if you see, it says 300 men, right? Even so, mostly it seems like 300 would be a more accurate representation. But even 300, it's a huge number. I mean, just think about 300 people being killed in that one instance, right? It is a huge number. So in terms of capability of this man in just standing there alongside David and just, killing that number is it's just huge, right? The second person that they talk about is Eliezer, right? Eliezer is the one who is, I think he's the one who killed he held on to the troops, so that he held on to the ground that they were, when the people of Israel had run away, when the troops had run away, he held on to that piece of land when the people fled, verse 11, right? And he stationed himself in the middle of the field and defended the Philistines, right? So if you think about it, when everybody else is losing hope and they're getting scared, oh, I don't think we can win this, they've run away, Eliezer is still standing there, right? He is still standing there, holding ground. And the third one is the person who is, who they say is, okay, that is Shammah. I think, I'm sorry, I mixed up Shammah, and Eliezer is the one who is holding on to that sword so tightly, and so tightly that he says that his hands couldn't be pried away, right? That they bought great victory, and the the men of Israel had retreated. That is verse 8, verse 9. So that is Eliezer with the sword, and Shammah, which is, held the ground, right? These three men, in terms of their capabilities, were extraordinary, right? In just the number and of people that they had killed, and then the loyalty that they had displayed, right? I think that's why those three, nobody could compete with those three, right? That was a given. So even there's an instance where verse 13 onwards, it talks about the fact that these three were the ones who, in the cave of Adullam, when David is talking about the well, drinking from the water of the well, right, where he grew up, right? If only a well of Bethlehem. So I don't know, this struck a very personal chord with me, because my grandmother, I remember in her dying bed, was also talking about drinking from the well in Kiraipur. So I know, when you see this, when you're thinking of, when you're seeing David ask, oh, if only I could drink from that well, it's not, please don't misunderstand it as somebody who's very weak and who has, he's such a weakling and he's just like moaning and he's like, I want the water from the well. That is not it, right? I think when he's asking it is when I'm just thinking about it in terms of the context, right? He has run away from home, running away to save himself from Saul. And he's remembering a time in his life when things were so completely different. I know that's where my grandmother also was, this thing in terms of just honoring realizing that phase in life that things were so completely different, right? And so he expresses that desire, if only I could drink from that well. And these three actually go and they hear that, they've taken it to heart, and they want to go and retrieve that water for David. They retrieve it, which is like at a great personal risk. They retrieve it, and what does David do? He pours the water out. And when you think of it, you'll feel like, really, they risked their life. And what are you doing? You're saying that I can't drink this. My God, now I can't drink it. But if you see, he pours it out to the Lord. That's what it says, right? It says that he pours out, verse 16 says it pours it out to the Lord. Now, if you think of the other reverse, when the three of them went, stole the water, they came back, and David was like, okay, thanks, guys, good job. Versus, I can't drink this because the cost that you guys have paid is so much that he pours it out to the Lord. Just think of it in terms of the two, the ways he could have responded, right? And just the fact that these men had that desire to, okay, whatever it is, whatever he wants, let's get it done, right? And remember the way in which they're all described. So we go on, and we are learning about few others who are, again, they're given a little bit more of a description. Abishai, the brother of Joab, we have come across him many a times in the thing. So we know about Abishai, and his leadership skills is something that we already know about. Then we know about Benanya, the son of Jehoiada, right? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but who I'm referring to, right? So Benanya is the one who, what does it say? It says that he fought the lion-like heroes of Moab. Look at the description, lion-like heroes. I mean, crazy. You're just imagining these men who are like so powerful, who's scary, and Benanya actually just standing against them and just defeating them. Abishai, when it talks about it, he says he had a spear against that Egyptian. He used that same spear and killed the man. So it's just again, like I said, allowing mighty men to be great, right? The list goes on, and it talks about so many more mighty men. You can see a few of the people who are, we know as Uriah the Hittite is mentioned as one of those mighty men. Even Bathsheba's father, I think, Ahithophel, is also mentioned, right? Eliam, the son of Ahithophel, right? These are all the great men. I think for me, when we were talking about the intent, right? When we are talking about, when he's listing all these people, it's just to talk about the loyalty that God expects, and the fact that they were so capable, right? And that's my question. That's where my question leads us. It leads us to the question in terms of David says credits all victories to God. So what do we understand when we are talking about these men and their capabilities? Why are they mentioned here in that way? How do we reconcile the two images? You can go ahead and unmute yourself and chat. Yeah. So yes, very true. You touched on that, Santosh. The fact that when they came to David, they were described as those that were in debt, that were distressed. They were, they were discontented with life, and just that, how God used them even through that, right? I think this is another way of David to say, you know what, these are the people that we thought were, written off by men, the society, and look at what they did. Look at how God transformed them, right? I think it's just his way of saying, okay, see, and I'm just thinking about it in terms of just being listed in that, along in like a lot of us are part of companies, and just being acknowledged as part of a leadership, right? Just being acknowledged as part of a thing of Israel's, the king that truly ruled Israel so beautifully, and he was the one who was stood out, and these men are in that leadership. Their names are taken in that leadership name, right? So if you think about it, just that's a way in which God is also honoring the fact that, they would have also had a horrible time during those years, right? Running away from Saul, the kind of things that they've talked about. But and they've had really trials that they brought them to their knees, that they were following David. But the loyalty they still demonstrated, the capabilities that they demonstrated, all of it was because God was there transforming their hearts. Yeah. Yeah, I know, exactly. And Rajiv, it becomes very, very easy for us to think that I'm not capable of anything, because these are the ways in which the world defines me, and I don't have any of those capabilities, right? And to believe in that seems so much more easy. And I know I have shared this personal testimony with all of you, where we're talking about, the fact that it does become, there are phases in our life that it becomes very, very difficult for us to see that, yes, I am made in the image of God, and I have certain skills, and he has a beautiful purpose for me in my life, right? And through that period of that phase of that, when we're really down, can we say that, no, I'm still here, ready to be used, right? I think that's an important aspect, that we need to just, keep on coming back to God and saying, God, I'm here. I want to be used. Use me, right? Yeah. All right. We'll go on to the next part, the last chapter. So I have been on a little bit, the speed has been a little bit fast, but I like the discussions we've been having so far. So with that, we come to the last chapter, and you see there are a few things over here that becomes a little bit iffy. It becomes a little bit difficult for us to answer some of these things, what is going on. And if you see chapter 4, 24, the first verse is again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against them, right? In First Chronicles 21, it says Satan stood against Israel, right? So when we're recounting the same incident, when we're talking about it, it says Satan stood against Israel, right? So when you think about anger of God, and they're like, okay, so God is getting angry. What happened? Why is he getting angry, right? But and we've seen this happen before. We've seen how Satan, and we understand First Chronicles 21:1 a little bit more, and it says that Satan is the one who stood against Israel, and God allowed it to happen, right? We've seen that in the case of Job also. Job 1, the chapters 1 and 2 talks about the fact that, Satan was walking on the earth, and he said, see, he comes back to God, and he required God's permission, right, to inflict Job, right? And so I think what Satan ended up doing over here, right, was asking, he needs, God is sovereign, right? Even Satan has to take permission from God when he is, saying that I want to do something against Israel. Let them show your true, are they really your children and all that, right? And we see that David is moved to take a census, and why exactly that is an issue which displeases God is, let me just explain that, because in Exodus 30:12, it talks about the fact that, right, what are the requirements for a census to be taken. And it feels like at this stage of life, why was he taking the census? Why? To show, okay, so these are all towards the end of his reign, right? I mean, and think about it. And so it is like, okay, so, we started from here, and this is where I left Israel. We were so good. We had so many men. It feels like that kind of somebody told him to make a metrics of, show me how great. It feels like that's where David is coming from, right? Show me the improvement of Israel, right? He wanted to, he decided on a couple of metrics, and he decided one of the other things that I need to do is look at the number of people that were there before and after, and that's going to be my measure of success, right? It feels like that is where he is coming from. And that's why God's anger is this thing. And even, in this verse, when you see that even Joab objects to the census, right? So like Santosh said, Joab is still very much on the scene. He is not mentioned in the 30. We have seen him being mentioned so many times in so many of these, in the conflicts, but even him, so we know the ways in which Joab has worked over the last couple of chapters. We've seen how evil he was, where he was coming from, the kind of disloyalty that he was demonstrating against David and God as king, right? But even Joab says, why do we need to do this? Because we know that God is in control. And, and it's not only Joab, it says even the captains of the army. So this is in verse 4, right? Therefore, Joab and the captains of the army, they also had a problem with this census being taken. They knew that it wasn't in their own strength. God was working in with them, right? And that reassurance of, of his care was something that they were rejecting by taking the census, right? And it seems like David doesn't listen to them. It seems like he's very, very, it takes 10 months for the census to happen. So think about it, right? There are these periods where he is very pig-headed, if for the lack of a better word, and he is not really open to the fact that you might be going wrong. 10 months it takes for that census to happen, and he doesn't change his mind. But finally, at the end, David's guilt and God's punishment does play out, and David's heart condemns him. That's how it describes his heart is being condemned. He saw the pride and the vanity and the foolish thing that he tried to do, right? So verse, and then he's asked to, he says, okay, I'm sorry, I realize I did a mistake. They come back with the numbers and they share with David, and like, okay, I realize I've done something very, very foolish, right? And what is interesting is he is given an option. Okay, so he goes to God and he says, God, I have sinned. Please put away my iniquity from me. What do I need to do, right? He's ready to pay the price, right, for his sin. And he says that, God offers him 3 options: 7 years of famine, all right, flee 3 months before your enemies, and 3 days of plague in your land. Now, if you think about it in terms of, what were the options before him? 7 years of famine, if you think about it, he's a king. He and his family will never experience the consequences of famine, because they will always have enough, right? So he could have chosen an easier route, say 7 years of famine. Let me take that. Okay, everybody else will this thing. I am good. I am the king. I will always have food on my table, right? Flee 3 months from the enemy, right? That means you can imagine 3 more months of war. And again, who's going to pay the price? It's going to be, it's been decided by these strong men that, David, you fought your last war, you're good, you're not going to be this thing. So it's going to be, again, the people who are going to be paying the price. So when you think about it, he chooses the 3 days of plague in this land, right? And when you think about it, you'll be like, okay, plague, right? That's something that God is in control, number one. It isn't man, because enemies is like, okay, man is this thing. And plague is something that, sickness is something that even my family cannot escape. I cannot escape. I can also be, I can also have COVID, right? So it feels like, okay, David chose an option where, he's right in the choice that he makes, because he chooses something that even he thinks that even he will have to pay the consequence for. That's the thought process, right? And so that's why he chooses that. And we see that even in those days, in that 3 days of plague that he chooses, so many people are killed in just those 3 days. And but we see how right David was in his selection, because when the angel of the Lord was, after 70,000, his hand is raised against another part of Israel, and God says, no, that's done, enough, stop, right? And we see how right David's choice was in depending upon God and his mercy, right? And saying that, no, I have a merciful father. I'm going to be choosing the 3 days. I'll choose that because I know my God is merciful, right? So we see how right he was in the choice of punishment that he chose, right? And then he, after that plague, so because of the place where he meets God and the angel of death, where this happens on the threshing floor of Aruna. I don't know if I've pronounced it correct. Threshing floor of this place, and that's where he meets God and that angel. And so he's been instructed by God to build an altar there. If you see this place, right? Where is this? This place is actually the same place that Abraham took his, in Mount Moriah, took Isaac to be sacrificed. That's the same hill that Jesus was, crucified on. So and it's the same place where Solomon's temple comes up, right? It's the site of Solomon's temple also later on. So you see the importance of that place, and just the power of just that, so many, scenes during, different periods of time are played out, and so many crucial scenes, right? And you understand the importance of just that particular place there. And you see that that man is offering to, you can take the land from me free, right? But he's refusing. So David refuses that noble offer, and he's not looking for a cheap way to satisfy God. We know of another person in history, in the Bible, who took the easy route, right? Cain and Abel, when we were talking about the kind of sacrifice that they were making, right? How Cain felt the need to take a shortcut, right? Making a cheap sacrifice, right? I have to do a sacrifice, let me just get it done. And, David could have also dismissed it like that. He wanted to give it, which is fine. He wanted to honor God, and that's his way of honoring God. He could have really justified it in taking that land, but he says that, I'm not going to take anything that doesn't cost me anything. And so he is ready to pay the price for it. Okay. And the other aspect that I wanted us to over here see is the fact that there is this burnt offerings that is being offered, which is for the sins committed. And then there are these peace offerings also, right? Those are the things that stood out in this particular part of the scripture. And just the fact that, for the sins I've committed and for an ongoing relationship with God, right? That's all the things that I have been called to do in building of the temple or altar to God, right? So those are the things that I wanted us to just spend a little bit of time thinking about in terms of 2 Samuel chapter 24, which is the last chapter. So in terms of just lessons for us as parents, right, in chastisement, right, what are the things that we can learn from this passage on our role as parents? Yeah. It makes us understand the thing. No matter how much we know this, right? Christ had to. Why did he have to suffer? When you're, especially when you're studying that pain that Jesus Christ demonstrates at that point of time, and God still says no, it's required, right? In the Garden of Bethany, and where he is saying that, Lord, if you can take this cup of suffering away from me. But like you said, Manu, God is holy, and he knows however much it hurt him, right? However much it pained him for his son to go through this thing. He knew that was the price that needed to be paid for each one of us, right? I think that's where I'm taking this in terms of just chastisement as parents, that so many times, like you and Santosh have just said, right? We as parents will feel like, okay, let's just ignore, let's just this thing, I'll, brush it under the carpet. But God has to be, he holds us to a different standard, right? So many issues that we don't deal with, he wants everything to be borne there, right? He doesn't want any kind of a under the carpet sweeping of issues. He wants us to be there, completely there. And what does it mean for us as parents? What did it mean for David and through his life? And the sacrifice, what did it mean for God in offering his son as a sacrifice? Yeah. All right. So yes, with that, we've come to the end. Does anybody else have anything else to add? We are exactly at 12:30. I knew that we would not have time for a breakout question, but I'm glad that all of us were able to talk in the session itself. Any other, as we're winding up, anybody has any other parting thoughts, any takeaways that they would like to share from these three chapters or from your whole study of the 2 Samuel? You can go ahead and just share.
The chapter was more like a summary of all his, whatever happened through, right? So yeah, so I think we learned a lot about him, about David through this chapter.
Yeah. It is like a flashback of his entire life. We were talking about so many aspects. Yeah. Anyone else? I think Santosh wanted to say something. Anyone else also?
What I was about to say was, what we learn is, why is David the man of God's heart, right? It's not because not because he didn't do any sin or anything, right? He did a lot of sin.
Yeah.
But see, for us, we don't acknowledge that we've sinned. We don't ask forgiveness. And as you mentioned earlier, right, when we ask forgiveness also, there is still a doubt that have I been forgiven? That doubt is there. But David, once he's asked forgiveness, he takes it on the assurance that yes, he's been forgiven. For us, like, okay, as you said, let me pray a little bit more harder next time for the same sin that I've asked forgiveness, right? But David was not that, and I feel that he's not repeated his sins.
Yeah, he hasn't.
Yeah.
Correct. So, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's one thing great about Bible is that Bible has not hidden that okay, the men of God were all righteous and great people. They were shown in their weakest point.
Yes.
But how God used them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was like, it was a thing that, it changed the perspective that, it's not that, he did a lot of sin, but, the way he dealt with that made him what he is today. So we can't follow Jesus because that's a thing. At least, try to, act upon it and try and become like, David say, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to end with this one thing, Santosh, because you talked about it and I felt that this is something that I wanted to end with, right? In this life, in 2 Corinthians 4:7-10, I just wanted to quickly end with the story of William Carey, right? William Carey in 1812. He was working on this translation of these Bibles, and his press caught on fire, right? Just before they were ready for the one of the publications, his press caught on fire, and all the work that they had done so far was had been destroyed, right? And at that time, the fact that he was like really broken is an understatement. But after that, the way in which God used his life and used people around him to know about his work, and then they just helped contribute and all that at the end of his 20-30 years, right, he had had 44 he had done, after the fire, there were only 5 machines left, 5 equipment left that were not destroyed in the fire. And he chose to, from there in 1832, I think is the year, he had released about 44 versions, in local languages of the Bible. So I just felt, as we were talking about David's life, right, the kind of trials that he's gone through, and he's been struck down and he's been in despair, but he has always been, he has always tried to, like you guys said, walk, walk in a way that God. He's always sought to come back, right? And I felt that 2 Corinthians 4:7-10, right, that verse talks so beautifully in terms of just the way in which throughout his life it has not been easy. He has had, and he is not this thing of perfection that we are trying to talk about. But through that, how can we be more Christ-like? How can we seek to? It might not be easy, but can we have a heart that wants to come back to God every time? And then, that would be our biggest, learning from the chapters of studying of David. All right. So with that, we end our study. If anybody else has any other thing they want to share, otherwise we are good at 12:35.